At the end of my last video, I was showing off my completed city street terrain board, and I had some houses in the background. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made them. Let's do it. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Tabletop Forge. In this video, I am making a total of 5 different houses. 3 separate pieces, 5 houses, but I start them all the same way. I sketch it out on some cardboard and I cut it out. The vertical lines here are where the cardboard is going to be bent, and the horizontal lines represent the different floors. I'm using floors that are about 3 inches tall, which is, to be honest, pretty out of scale. Typically in D&D, 1 inch is 5 feet, so that's 15-foot ceilings. But I wanted these buildings to be tall, to have sort of an epic, height and scale of this medieval city. And I also wanted the houses to be playable. I wanted it to be easy to reach inside and to move miniatures around. I find that when I try to build things that are more to a realistic scale, I end up finding it more difficult to reach into and maneuver miniatures around. So the height here is meant to make that more hassle-free. As I've said before, for me, making terrain for D&D is a balance between what's realistic, what's playable, and what's practical and easy to make. Here I'm not cutting all the way through these vertical lines. This is where the house is going to bend and create the main structure of the building. This first piece I'm working on is going to be a set of 3 houses that sit side by side and are open on the back with playable interiors. The next house I'm making is a fully enclosed house with levels that are removable so you can play inside, and then the last house I make is going to be also open in the back, but because it's half destroyed and damaged. I'm experimenting with these different types of construction and how we use them in game, and at the end of this video I'm going to give you some feedback on the pros and cons of each build. This second house has a little bit of an overhang. Later I'm going to support that with some foam pillars. For this last house, I'm going to cut a straight sheet of cardboard and slide it in between the other 2. Can you believe I'm going to take these humble cardboard buildings and turn them into something awesome?
You gotta stay tuned to find out.
This is the layout for my fully enclosed house with the separate removable floors. I didn't want it to have a boring footprint like a square or rectangle, so I decided to have a more irregular shape, and I sort of designed it so that it would fit on my city street terrain board right where the 2 roads meet. Once I have this general shape down, I'll go ahead and slice through the middle to separate the 2 floors so that they can sit on top of each other and have fully playable interiors. Here we have some very important footage of me playing around with my toys. Okay, back to work. Foam bricks along the foundation of these buildings. We're going to do lots of foam in this build. We're going to use some foam boards, some foam pillars, some foam bigger boards, timbers, some foam shingles on the roof. That might be it, but lots of foam, lots of hot wire table. Check it out. I cut out a bunch of square foam timbers, and I used a wire brush to texture them up to make them look like wood, and they fit very nicely into these little gaps where the cardboard was split and folded over. Sometimes these pillars won't fit where I want them to, so I have to cut them. Where the two floors fit together, I glue one of these boards only halfway on the bottom part so that it creates like a little lip where the top floor can slide into it. When it's together, you sort of don't even notice there's a seam, and then when it comes apart, you have a nice slot for it to fit back into, and you don't need magnets or anything to hold it together. All of these white foam boards that I'm using on the front of the buildings are made out of the dollar store foam board you can get at the dollar store. I feel like it used to be easier to peel off the paper. You can see there's still some like black paper and glue left on some of these boards. I don't know, lately I've been having trouble peeling it off cleanly. I kind of have to put water on it and spend some time rubbing off all the excess glue. But because it's cheap and it's the perfect thickness for things like wooden boards, I still end up buying a lot of this stuff and using it in a lot of my projects. I cut out this piece of foam to be the top of the second story, and I glued this piece of cardboard beneath it so that it would kind of slot in there and fit just right. And later I use a pencil and a knife to carve in some wooden boards on the top of that foam. I didn't go too crazy with the designs or the patterns with some of these boards, especially on the sides. I try to keep it nice and simple just to break up some space. But I did try to get a little bit more decorative on the fronts of the buildings, vary things up a little bit, and looked at some historical pictures to try to get some inspiration. On the inside of the buildings, I used some of these thicker foam timbers, and I glued them in place to sort of break up the different floors and also serve as a foundation for the wooden flooring that I'm going to put in later. Here I'm just test fitting some of the wooden flooring just to make sure that everything's level and that they'll fit in there nicely. This whole build was heavily inspired by another YouTube channel called Devs and Dice, and one of the things he did in there that blew my mind was to use these Lego windows for the windows. It turns out these are a great scale and they're very cheap to buy online in bulk. They have a little screen that pops into them as well that I'll show you later, and windows are just one of the things that I always kind of hate to make by hand. It's small and tedious and hard to make them look the same, so I am very happy to outsource this part to the Lego company. Thank you, Lego, and thank you, Devs and Dice. For these buildings with the overhangs, they sort of had this ugly space at the bottom that looked unfinished. I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I knew you weren't going to see it very often, but I decided to take some of these wooden boards and cover up the area. Next, I am pretty excited to show off these jigs that will allow you to cut out these foam pillars. I've seen these for sale online before, but I was able to actually 3D print these for free, which is pretty awesome. When you go to 3D print them, obviously you can kind of change the size and dimensions, so you can customize that. But man, these are so easy to use. All you have to do is cut out like a rectangular piece of foam that will fit in there nice and snug, and then you basically just carve out one side, you pop it out and turn it, pop it back in there, and then you carve out the next side, and once you go through all four sides, you have this nice foam pillar that is very well detailed for being such a simple piece and such a simple process. Again, check out how detailed that is. It's so cool that you can create something like this in such a simple way, just out of foam and a hot wire table. I have a few different jigs, so here I used a different type of pillar, and it wasn't quite tall enough to fit underneath the overhang, so I had to cut out a few little square pieces of foam to make them fit. One thing I like to do at least once in every video is to take some tinfoil or some rocks and press it into foam. Here I'm working on my third piece. It's the house that's open in the back, but it's because it's been destroyed and kind of damaged. I'm using the Walmart craft sticks here, but this is kind of the last of the ones I have because I feel like I can't find them at Walmart anymore. Instead, I decided to buy a bunch of coffee stir sticks from Amazon, and I'll be using those for the rest of the flooring you see. I actually prefer the craft sticks just because they're a little bit thicker and they stay nice and straight. But until I can get them in bulk, I'm going to stick to the coffee stir sticks. These are the coffee stir sticks here. They're much thinner. Some of them are warped a little bit, which was kind of annoying to try to keep them glued down. But you know what? I think they turned out pretty good in the end. So 7 out of 10 would use coffee stir sticks again. Once the glue dried, I took some flush cutters and I trimmed off all the excess pieces of wood. I 3D printed some doors to use for these houses, but I didn't want to glue them into place. I wanted them to be removable so that miniatures could go in and out of the house. So I just glued some foam strips into place to make a very simple frame for the door to slide in and out. To add some more variety and to add some more ambush spots, I decided to build a little balcony area coming out of the third floor of one of these houses. I cut up some old cereal boxes to act as a roof, and then I'll glue some foam shingles on top of that. This is the building that's damaged or destroyed on the backside, so it only gets a partial roof here. Quick check just to make sure I can fit a mini in there, and we're on to the next step. It is time for the sometimes daunting task of adding shingles to the roof. I've seen a variety of different methods for adding shingles to the roofs. Some people like to cut out individual shingles from like the cereal box material, and it creates a good effect, but it takes a while and it's sort of tedious. My favorite method is a method I stole from another YouTuber called Black Magic Craft, where we take a long strip of foam and we kind of cut out this master template of one row of shingles. This takes some practice to get it good. This is definitely the best one I've done on camera, and you just want to try to make sure that they're roughly the same width, but there's also some variety, right? Some are a little bit longer or shorter than the others. Once you have this template done, you're going to take a wire brush and start carving in some texture to make it look like wood grain on just this top level of shingles. Once you have the top all textured up, you're going to put it on the hot wire table and cut it nice and thin, and that's going to be one row or one layer of the shingles. And then you do it all over again. Wire brush the next layer, shave it off on the hot wire table, and repeat. Once you stack these layers on each other and sort of stagger the pattern, I think it creates a great illusion of there being individual shingles on the roof. I think the only downside to this method is that the shingles can be pretty fragile, so I think it's important that after you glue everything in place, you cover everything with a coat of Mod Podge. Once I have all the shingles placed, I'll go through and cut off all the excess, straighten up the edge there, and across the very top, I don't have this on camera, but I cut some individual shingles and I overlap them to cover up that gap across the top. For the different balcony areas, I 3D printed some wrought iron railings that will go around the exterior. Overall, I'm happy with the way it looked, but I do always have this issue when I print things that are very thin and long that they tend to warp a little bit. If you catch these at the right angle, you can see a little bit of a curve in them, but it's not that noticeable, and I still like the way it turned out. This right here marks the end of the construction phase. It took a while, but I have all of these buildings built, and I have all of the foam parts covered in some black paint and some Mod Podge. Here I'm mixing together some tile grout, some white glue, and some water. This is going to serve as the plaster mix that goes between all the boards on the faces of the buildings. I use some sculpting tools, some old paint brushes, and I sort of just drip the plaster in there and try to push it to all the corners and fill up those spaces. It's not a huge deal if you get some of the plaster on the wooden beams. You can just take a wet paintbrush and wipe off most of it. Once you paint over it, you won't even notice. For larger flat areas like the interior, I use a palette knife and I try to scrape it very thin and create one continuous layer of texture. After the plaster dries, I do one more coating of black paint and Mod Podge to seal everything together, and then it's time to paint. I'm going to let the airbrush do a lot of the work here, and I'm going to start by covering everything with a coat of white. Next, I'm using a brown ink through the airbrush, and I'm not sure why I painted everything brown here. I should have just stuck to the wooden parts and left most of the plaster white. Once the paint starts going down, you know we're close to the end. I'm going to let this footage speak for itself. If you have any questions about paints or techniques, let me know in the comments. I use a homemade wash on all of the stone and brickwork. The wash is just a combination of black, brown, and green paints, lots of water, and a little bit of dish soap to help it flow into all the cracks. The final step of every good paint job is a dry brushing. Here I'm using my favorite final color khaki. It's going to help highlight all of the texture, but also tie everything together. We did it, folks. 5 different houses done, 3 separate pieces. Very excited to show you the final products. Let's roll it. I love how all 3 of these pieces turned out and how they complement each other on the board. I do have to confess, so far no one has actually gone inside any of these houses during our sessions, but we have made use of the balcony areas to ambush people on the road. I think the piece with the 3 houses together is the most useful and efficient piece, and it hasn't seemed to matter that it was open in the back, as we tend to place this piece along the exterior of the play area anyways. The single house with the destroyed backside worked similarly, and when placed on the exterior of the board, it gets treated like a regular house. Obviously, if you wanted an area of the city with damaged houses, then it would fit in perfectly. Lastly, the fully enclosed house looks great in any location on the board, but all the extra construction hasn't really paid off yet, as no one has used the interior of the house yet. One big takeaway from our session so far is how useful balconies and exterior areas are, as they seem to get used even when other parts of the houses aren't. Maybe things will change in the future as we play, but that's my assessment so far. Let me know in the comments which piece you like the most, and I'll catch you next time on Tabletop Forge.